Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Leah Clark. Leah is the Senior Director of Leadership at GP Strategies. She works closely with our clients to understand their leadership and engagement challenges and consults with them on the creative solutions. Leah has a Master of Arts degree in Organizational Psychology from Columbia University and a Bachelor of Arts in English and Sociology from Boston College. We have a great discussion planned today with Leah. So Leah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Sue. I will get my PowerPoint shared and we will get started. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending on where you are dialing in from. I'm excited today to be here to talk about reinventing leadership. Who wants to lead, who doesn't, and what employees really think of their leaders. You know, at the risk of stating the obvious, a lot has changed in the world of leadership, in the world of work, in all of our lives, against the backdrop of certainly some unprecedented times. The pandemic, the turnover tsunami. It would be almost impossible, I think, to not view the world of leadership through a slightly different lens against that context. Because people are thinking a lot about who they are as leaders, who they are as employees, who they are as parents and as family members, and evaluating what their life will be like going forward, and thinking about perhaps those things which don't serve them, things that perhaps they did or had in the past that are no longer of use to them, that they may be leaving behind in light of this change, this pivot, if you will, in a post-pandemic or mid-pandemic world. So to get us all started, a little bit of humor here and to warm us all up, when you think about the things that you might be shedding or eliminating in a post-pandemic world, which of these might you no longer need? If we can pull up the poll, perhaps high fives are something you're no longer doing. I've seen that in fits and starts on the soccer field with my son, some high five, some elbow bumps still. Maybe handshakes, buffets are something you no longer want to go near, especially maybe that one doesn't look the most appealing. Touch screens, mosh pits. What do you no longer need in this mid-pandemic or post-pandemic world? What are you leaving behind? I was talking to some of my colleagues as I prepared for this, and I decided that my new definition of living dangerously is ordering from a touch screen while I high-five somebody on the way to my mosh pit. So no longer want to do any of those, but certainly the combination. And I see Mariana is saying, where's all of the above? Absolutely. I think that is a reality. But let's take a look here. I know we're waiting for a couple more respondents to come in, but what of these items are you leaving behind? No longer serves you, and you're viewing these differently in this mid-pandemic or post-pandemic world. So Sue, about how long left in the
I still see some coming in, so we're going to wait just another moment.
Okay, it's a tough choice, I know. But there are certainly so much of what we're doing is being reevaluated. All right, the poll has ended and it looks like our answer is, see if they can pop up
Still
here.
have some, oh, here we go.
All right, it's an inspiring poll. We're getting a lot of people responding. Okay, so it looks like mosh pits, apparently a lot of you were participating in those pre-pandemic and no longer. Another 28% say buffets and 21% handshakes. And, you know, I wanted to put this poll in here. Certainly it's not anything we conducted research around, but just to get you thinking about, you know, how much of life has changed and what are we leaving behind that no longer serves us? People are making very specific choices about their lives, about their jobs, and jettisoning that which no longer serves them. What about leadership? Do we still need leadership in a virtual and hybrid environment? If folks have gotten it done, and we know they have in the past 18 months, 2+ years, in a remote and continued hybrid environment with the watchful eye of their leader now happening over Zoom or maybe not at all, do we still need leaders? If you read articles, including this one and a host of others, you might believe that managers are no longer necessary. Folks have gotten it done from home. 90% of organizations report that they've been as productive or more productive in this virtual and remote environment. So we've been able to get it done. The question is, what does that mean for managers, for leaders? Is this the death knell of leadership? Well, it probably comes as no surprise to any of you, given the topic and given my area of interest, that I don't believe this to be the case at all. What I do think is this is an amazing opportunity for leaders to reinvent themselves, to really think about how it is they now can show up for their people in different and more elevated ways. But what does that reinvention look like? How should they reinvent? Where should they start? Well, we asked, and this is what we're going to take you through today and unpack through the data. We're going to talk about trends that we saw before the pandemic that are continuing to grow and expand during this time frame, and trends that I think are going to continue, hopefully long after we are all in our mosh pits and eating epithets again. But this is what we asked about, and this is what we want to share with you today in the research, because I think that this really informs some key ways that leaders should think about reinvention in this new world. First, we asked, what are the biggest successes and stumbles of leaders? We asked individual contributors to think broadly about leaders that they followed. Where have they seen them do really well, and what maybe are some of the challenges they've observed? We then said, let's talk about your specific manager, your direct manager. Are they doing a good job? What do you need from them, and how are they showing up for you? What motivates you about the work that you do? What keeps you coming back, or maybe has you considering other options? And then, do you want to be a people leader? Why or why not? So let's dig in, and I'll share with you. When we asked individuals to think about what are the biggest success factors in leadership, in the leaders that you've observed, what rises to the top of the list? Now, if you're looking to do the math, and in fairness to how the research was conducted, we did allow respondents to choose more than one option. So full disclosure on how the data shows up in the report. But wanted to share with you that what we heard was good communication, top of the list. This was no surprise to us, whether it's our research that we've done in the past or other research that you're probably a consumer of. Communication always rises to the top of the list as critical to leader success. It's the way we share feedback. It's the way we share goals. We use communication to connect with people. Whether you are handling conflict or sharing an inspiring vision or conveying your authenticity, communication is the single biggest and most important tool that a leader has in his or her arsenal. We also heard trust, and we know that being able to connect with people in large part is driven by our ability as leaders to show up in a trustworthy way, to demonstrate that we're reliable for our people, that we care about them. Trust is a big element of connection. And then last but not least, certainly competence, knowledge, industry knowledge. And this reinforces what we have known about leadership for some time at GP Strategies and what we're advocates of. This combination of good leadership being about both competence and connection. That good leaders get a seat at the table of leadership, often because of their competence, but what keeps them there is their ability to forge connection. Trust is a big element of that. And how do you communicate, or how do you share competence and connection? You've got it with communication. So these are the biggest indicators of leader success. But what about stumbles? So we'll open up the poll as I walk through these. We asked a similar question. What are the biggest stumbles of the leaders you followed? Is it arrogance? Poor communication skills? How do your leaders do when they handle conflict? Maybe there's something in their trustworthiness. Are they not supporting a diverse and inclusive environment? Have you seen that as something that has been the biggest stumbles of the leaders you followed? Maybe they don't understand the team challenges, they're not in touch with career aspirations, or they're unaware of my personal life. And again, in the research, we offered more than this. We allowed respondents to pick more than one response. I believe we gave them 2 or 3. But here, just for purposes of the poll and to get you thinking about the leaders you followed, we're narrowing the playing field a little bit and would love to know from you, what are the biggest stumbles of the leaders that you've followed? So, Sue, how are our responses coming in?
Coming in, I still see quite a few coming in, so I'm going to hold for just a moment here.
All right, we'll let them come in. Hopefully this has inspired some thoughts or some reflection or some energy on the part of those of you on the call. So as you think about these stumbles of the leaders you followed, what has come up more often than not across the board? Again, when we asked this, we were asking our respondents to think pretty broadly about leaders that they have followed.
Okay, I think we're close here.
Okay, great. The poll has ended. And yeah, Marisol, again, I recognize I'm forcing you to make a singular choice here. And many of you are looking for all of the above or, okay, so poor communication is at the top of the list. And it looks like another decent number of you said not trustworthy, doesn't understand the team challenges. All right, so some of what you are sharing is consistent with what we saw in the individuals we asked, and there's something that's a little bit different as well. So when we asked what are the biggest stumbles of the leaders you followed, poor communication, there it is again, followed by arrogance, and then poor decision making. So a couple of things I just want to unpack here as we head into the first of 4 leadership reinventions that we see coming out of this research. So in the stumbles, poor communication rose to the top of the list. What I think is interesting is that when we looked at the success factors, there was a slightly more balanced approach or a balanced set of responses. So it wasn't one single issue that necessarily carried the day. So leader success is a more nuanced combination. But poor communication, 52%. Oh boy, how much that one big issue can submarine a leader, according to the respondents that we surveyed. Now, I want to go to arrogance. A bit of debate in the hollowed halls of GP about this one. And whether or not this was something that we needed to unpack more. I think we do, but it definitely engendered some strong feelings on the part of our respondents, so much so that 30% indicated that this was a big leader stumble. Now, I want to be clear that this is perceived arrogance. And what does this really mean? It could mean a multitude of things. It could mean that the leader is making all of the decisions themselves, and that may hit upon the poor decision making as well. It may mean that they are not seeking outside opinions or advice, or they're not open to it. It may mean, in a more benevolent interpretation of this, that those leaders are keeping their people at a distance from what they're working on, and they are perhaps shielding them from challenges or concerns, or maybe there's insecurity that is masking itself as arrogance. What I would say is the reason almost doesn't matter as much as the awareness that the leader needs to have about how they're coming across to others. Again, it's a perception that those individuals responded to about how their leaders are coming across and the stumbles that they see. And so this poor communication combined with perceived arrogance and poor decision-making leads to what I would advocate is some questions that leaders need to be asking themselves, and then the first reinvention that we see coming out of the research. So on this spectrum of stumbling to succeeding, what I would say is, as a leader, ask yourself, do I share information transparently? Are my people aware of what I'm working on? Do I involve others in the decision-making process where I can? Especially now that many of those individuals have made decisions in their dispersed, home-based, somewhat separated environment. They've gotten a lot more independent. Am I communicating not just for competence, but also for connection? But most of all, am I aware of how I'm coming across to others? So reinvention number 1 to move from a place of ego to emotional intelligence. Be willing to express vulnerability. It's okay as a leader not to have all of the answers. In fact, we know that people will rally behind leaders when they are authentically expressing their vulnerabilities or their weaknesses. They're not going to throw stones. They kind of come in to support you with the skills that they have in places where maybe you're not quite as strong. Ask for help. That's okay. Be inclusive in your decision making. You never know where good ideas are going to come from. And sometimes the folks who are a part of your team may be closer to the data or the information that could inform a smart ultimate decision. And so be inclusive and make sure that different voices are heard. And let me just move my chat. Be transparent, certainly, in your communication so that people know what you're working on. And if you are, going heads down on something, there's clarity about where you're spending your time and why, so that you can shift from a sense of maybe a little bit of ego to greater emotional intelligence and awareness. So reinvention number 1, from ego to emotional intelligence. I'm going to tip my hand with reinvention number 2 and then unpack why it is that we're advocating for this shift. And the reinvention is to go from tell to talk. The data behind this that's leading us to advocate for greater conversation with your employees, with them and about them, comes from a few elements of what we saw in the data. And one of the things we asked was, how often does your direct leader spend time performing the following? And we saw we gave a list of activities. These are not the only ones that we gave to our respondents, but what we saw is that a good number said that my manager is usually or always delegating. They're spending a lot of time working independently, and they're working on team cohesion. What I would say is these are good and necessary and essential things for leaders to do. Even the working independently has value when sometimes they need to work on budgets or other strategic plans. So good and essential skills. The challenge that I would throw out there, particularly in a hybrid and increasingly evolved workplace or larger work environment, is to elevate the quality of your leadership interactions, to spend time on more highly value add activities. And what do I mean by that? I mean specifically coaching conversations, career conversations. Engage with your people and talk to them in a way that empowers them and shows them that you have a vested interest in what they're doing and in their career aspirations. The challenge is what you see in this bottom box, and is more concerning to those of us who looked at the data. The challenge is that 35% of individual contributors say their managers never or seldom engage in career development conversations, and 28% said they never or seldom spend their time coaching. And I think this is a big wake-up call for leaders who are looking to say, how can I continue to be relevant? How can I continue to elevate the way I interact with my people? Nevertheless, there are challenges coaching, and I want to spend just a moment unpacking those. Certainly, leaders need to have confidence and skills associated with being a good leader as coach. But I want to click down a little bit on the lack of time and the not sure how to do that in a hybrid world. So lack of time, I would say, is sometimes a bit of a red herring or a bit of a distraction, because if you have the time to tell, you have the time to talk, you have the time to coach. So that moment that you can take delegating or telling is exactly the moment you need in the cadence of your day-to-day to ask a good open-ended question, to ask what I would call is an everyday coaching conversation. So move from tell to talk, and lacking the time. If you have a moment to talk, you have a moment to tell or to engage in a conversation about the employee or in a way that's supportive of them. Not sure how to do it in a hybrid world. I've spoken on this topic before, and so I'll repeat a message that I know my colleagues and I feel very strongly about, which is if you have those good, strong leadership skills that you've always had for many years in person or remote or hybrid, it's exactly what you need to be successful right now, meaning the skills haven't changed that you need as a leader. The context has changed. And so you need to apply those coaching skills with greater intentionality. But the skills haven't changed. If you know how to coach in an in-person world, you know how to do it in a hybrid world. The advocacy is just doing it for greater intentionality, because certainly there are nuances to being in a hybrid environment, not the least of which is certainly that distance, that inability to read physical cues, and to be much more mindful of the modality that you choose in your communication. So not sure how to do it in a hybrid world. I would say you do. You just need to apply those skills with greater intentionality. And why am I spending so much time on this? Why do I think this reinvention is so important? Well, again, coaching is a high value add activity, and it's a great way to empower others, to give them the faculties that they need, or the thinking that they need to make decisions for themselves, as they are maybe, again, not co-located with you as a leader. It encourages innovative approaches. You're not telling them what to do. You're asking them good questions and engaging in a dialogue that will lead them sometimes, hopefully, to an idea that you didn't think of, but is right for them and constructive for the organization, productive as well. I think coaching, and career coaching especially, demonstrates a vested interest in your employees. And here's the thing, if you're not having that kind of a dialogue with them, they're having it with themselves in their great resignation and their great reflection. They're having it with their spouses and other people in their lives. And it's leading in part, I think, to the turnover tsunami. Or maybe said differently, you might be able to stem that turnover tsunami tide if you're engaging in more frequent career conversations. So how do you reflect and think about, well, gosh, am I more of a teller or a talker? Ask yourself, who shares first in your team meetings and your one-on-ones? Do you spend time tuning in to what's really going on with your employees? What's happening with them? Do you know what we call their lived reality in a hybrid world? Do you know why hybrid's important to them, or what's happening that asks them, or that causes them to ask you, rather, for that increased flexibility in a hybrid environment? Do I ask thoughtful questions of them? And here's a key one at the end. It might seem a little bit goofy. Do I know what the best moments of the week are for my employees, or the worst? And the reason why I like that one is because you're starting to get at, with that very simple question, some elements of career development and career satisfaction. I don't think that a career conversation needs to be this very long, dramatic, gazing into each other's eyes kind of conversation. It can be really simple and more frequent. And in fact, our research has shown that that's what folks want. They want to be talking about work that satisfies them, that connects to their career satisfaction and career development on an informal and more regular basis. So reinvention from tell to talk, clarify the what more than the how. What do you need them to do? But as best you can, as the scenario allows it, and not everyone does, let them determine the how they get there. Coach so that they can find their own empowering path to success. Ask questions and listen actively. Tune into what's going on with your employees and give them the space to appropriately and comfortably share that. Make it a habit. As I mentioned, it doesn't need to be formal sit down. Find ways to bring these conversations into the cadence of your interaction with your employees. Understand where you can support, and I'm glad that that one is right below the one above it, because if you listen actively, you'll hear those opportunities for support where you can come in as a leader and clear hurdles, or maybe make connections for that person to opportunities that would help them enhance their career development. And and then ask them what's important. And that last one is going to lead me into reinvention number 3. Because what you're asking them really is to share some insight on their values and what's important to them. And I'll share a little bit as we put up this poll about why that's so important, why you want them to share their values. Because that's a key part of what you'll want to talk through or understand as you have those career development conversations. And here's the key message. This is an individualized equation for every employee that you have. So even though this poll here and the research that we've done and others have done provide some trends around what is top of mind for much of our workforce, the bottom line is this isn't the answer for you about the values of your employee, because those conversations need to be individualized. So want to be really clear on that. Again, we did provide our respondents with more answers than this one, more options than this. And so I just want to be cognizant of the fact that these 7 aren't the only things that we asked about, but for purposes of not making the poll something that you had to scroll down, we really limited this to 7 questions just to get you thinking a little bit. So how important are the following for you to have in the work that you do? Is it working with colleagues I respect? I know somebody, Marisol, or someone's going to say, I want to choose more than one. Being well compensated, personally growing and developing, showing up as your authentic or true self, personal well-being, work that gives a sense of purpose, or work-life balance. So Sue, how are we doing with the poll?
Yep, we still have a few coming in. I'll close it here in just a moment.
Okay. Yeah. And this is this is maybe one of the hardest, maybe a little harder than the what are you not going to touch in a pandemic world, because this really speaks to something key and core to who you are and certainly to who your people are. So might be a little bit hard to make a singular choice. For me, it would be hard to make a singular choice with this one more so than maybe any of the other polls that we've had here. So let's see what you all said, and then I'll share with you what we heard from your people. Okay, so it looks like for many of you that work-life balance is critical. Actually, work that gives you a sense of purpose. All right, that came in number 1. And it looks like personally growing and developing. Oh, we may have, well, I won't tip my hand into who we may have a lot of on the call with that one. But it looks like many of you also said work where you can show up as your authentic self. So fewer are choosing working with colleagues I respect. Fewer are choosing being well compensated. So interesting sort of results here in what you all shared. Let's get to what we heard from the people that we surveyed. And it's going to lead into reinvention number 3, from organizational and personal values separated to organizational and personal values coexist or collide or bump up against each other. And this is a drum that has been beating for some time, I think pre-pandemic, but certainly is something that we've been talking about so much more against the backdrop of the last 2 years, which is that personal values and organizational values are coming closer together. They're coexisting. They're smushing together, as one of my colleagues has said, much in the same way our organizational work lives and our personal lives have become much more closely aligned. So what did we see in the results? Again, individual conversation you should have with your employees, but this gives us some directional information around what you might hear from your people when you talk to them. So work-life balance, top of the list, well-being, compensation, followed by working with colleagues I respect, showing up as my true self, and doing work that gives me a sense of purpose. And the difference we're seeing in the results from you and these respondents may have to do with the fact that we asked individual contributors because we wanted to get the straight scoop from them on what they thought of their leaders. And here is what they shared with us. I want to point something out that we have seen in the research we've conducted time and time again, and that is compensation is important, but it often stays at that third spot right there that you can see reflected on this chart, with issues like balance and well-being and purpose often taking center stage. And that's important for leaders because oftentimes they shy away from those career conversations because they're concerned that it's going to revolve around compensation and they can't give their individuals a promotion or a raise. But what I would say is, yes, compensation is important, but we also know that people want to talk about doing work that gives them a sense of purpose and what matters to them. Increasingly, in a Zoom fatigue, digital fatigue, just generally fatigued environment, your employees may be dealing with issues of well-being and work-life balance. So this information is directional. I think it gives leaders the knowledge that these are some considerations that your individual contributors may be dealing with, and to lean into some of these conversations as you coach and as you have career discussions with them. Because if you aren't having those conversations with them, somebody else is, and or they may be doing their own reflection, because so many folks have moved from great resignation to great reflection. And that's not a term that I coined, though I wish I had. And so what's the dynamic that's going on here? I often, as I prepare for these webinars, think really hard about the words that I choose, and sometimes somebody else just says it better. And I came across this wonderful op-ed from a professor at Wheaton College, and the title of the article was along the lines of, "We weren't happy before the pandemic either." And I highly suggest, if you're interested, you read it. But what I think he really has encapsulated is, or he's asked the question first, how do all of these dynamics come together? The shift in the job market, the housing market exploding. And he says we're in the midst of a societal shift and an awakening about how we want our lives to be different. And I've highlighted what I think is some important messaging. He said the pandemic has disabused us of the illusion of time as a limitless resource, and of the false promise that the sacrifices we make for our careers are always worth it. That the pandemic has reminded us that life is more than what we do. It's about whom we spend our lives with. We cannot hug a career or laugh with a promotion. We're made for friendship, love, and community. Really powerful words. And I think an indicator of what we're seeing in this evaluation of personal values in a more profound way than we ever have. Again, trend that started before, drum that was beating quietly and now even louder than it was before. So as you consider this third reinvention, I would encourage you to think about, are you tuned into the values of your employees? Do you know what motivates them? And have you shared what drives you? Are you talking openly about issues of digital fatigue, well-being, and work-life balance? Do you create an environment of psychological safety where people feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work? And are you having those career conversations with your people on a regular and informal basis so that you can support this reinvention? Again, somebody else's words with attribution. The reinvention here is to understand and to embrace the fact that employees are more than workers, and they have an identity outside of the hours committed to making a living. No more apparent, I think, to so many of us than it has been in recent history. And jobs, and I would say leaders, that treat their employees honorably and provide flexibility and leave room for life outside of work will thrive. So reinvention number 3, acknowledging, embracing, talking about this collision of personal and corporate values. Okay, so before we get to reinvention number 4, I want to take a bit of a turn or narrow in our focus and let you know that in addition to asking individual contributors within that group, we asked who intended to be a future leader, who wants to lead and why do you want to lead? We really wanted to understand who saw themselves in this way, and were their priorities and were their needs different from a broader population. And so here's what we heard. We heard when we asked the question that 37% want to be a leader, pure and simple, to advance their career. Another 29% said, I want to develop people. That's why I want to move into the role of leadership. And another 33% said, you know what? It's really about both. And so I think when we look at that 62% that said they're motivated by developing people, or at least in part, in combination with career advancement and developing people, how can we be assured that we are equipping them with the skills that they need to lead people successfully? And for the 37% who said that they are really only moving into a people leadership to advance their career, and maybe they're less concerned about developing people, well, what I would say is, really two things for organizations. One, perhaps consider an alternate track. Maybe there's a path to advancement for your high potentials that doesn't involve leading people, if that's not something that they're interested in. Alternatively, and this is perhaps where I personally land, how can you connect the dots for that 37% who initially make the choice to be a people leader to advance their career? How can you connect the dots between the benefit of investing time and leaning into people development on the results that they seek, on the results that will advance not only their career, but their group, their division, and their organization? So help them to connect those dots and understand the importance of leaning into people leadership skills. Keeping an eye on my watch here to make sure I leave some time for questions. So if you download the research, and actually I think you'll all get a copy of the research as a follow-up to this, you're going to see that we unpack the future people leadership element with greater specificity around the numbers and what we asked. But I want to give you the lowdown here on what we saw. So first, we saw that future people leaders, as I mentioned, they want to develop others and they want to advance their career. A good number say both. Another population is just about career advancement. But generally speaking, people development is something that they appear to be taking seriously. What do these folks value? And I think some of you might be in the numbers based on what I saw in the last poll. So your future people leaders, some of whom you might also classify as high potentials, they want work-life balance and they want wellness. So running them into the ground, despite perhaps their high performance, is not a solution, because they're only going to burn out, be fatigued, and they've expressed that this is important to them in the results that we saw. But what we also saw, and this was consistent with what some of you responded in that 17%, but not what we saw in the broader population, this group said that personal development was very important to them. It was one of their top priorities. And so there's a message in here that I'll continue from reinvention number 3, which is to continue to focus on personal development and career development for all of your employees, but with particular attention to your future people leaders, because they have expressed that this is an area that's important to them. And again, I think that high potentials, future people leaders, they're more likely to leave if this element is not satisfied in addition to the others. Okay, where do they want to develop? Well, we asked, and what they said was, we most need help in people leadership skills, things like delegation, communication, building trust, and in the mindsets required to be a future people leader. They prioritized less things like technical skills, strategic or analytical thinking, and they said where we really think we need to focus in order to be good future people leaders is in the area of skill sets and mindsets. I hate the term soft skills, but that's essentially what they said. We get that this is really important to our success as future people leaders. What do they need? No surprise. They need career development and coaching. That's what they're asking for. That was what they identified as most critical to their success as future people leaders. And how do they want it? They want it through on-the-job coaching from their leaders, blended with formal development journeys. So much like I started, I want to reemphasize here, I don't think that leadership is going away. These shifts are not the death knell of leadership. It is an opportunity for leaders to reinvent themselves, because your future people leaders want this kind of support from you. They're asking for it. That's the good news. Bit of a challenge here. They're not convinced that their current leaders have the ability to develop them. And I want to unpack this. It can sometimes be a little bit hard to decipher, but what we asked these future people leaders is, how important is it that your direct leader has the skills to develop you? How important is it? And then we asked the question, does your direct leader have the skills to develop you? And what we saw is a gap between the importance of that direct leader to develop the skills and the future people leader's confidence or belief that that leader actually has the skills. So what's my message here? My message here is level up, leaders. Level up and focus on these higher value added skills, because your people want you to show up for them in some meaningful ways. And so how can you, in the fourth reinvention, move from losing leaders to rising ranks? Ask yourself, do you know who the future people leaders are on your team? Who on your team wants to be a people leader? Do you have development plans in place for them? Remember, that's something that they really valued. Am I asking them how I can better support their development? Am I taking the time to role model key skills? And am I having regular career conversations with them? So that you can move to reinvention number 4, from lost leaders to rising ranks. Reinventing leadership means a stronger focus on those development conversations with your future people leaders, including more frequent and transparent conversations about what they want, who can help them, and the best way to go about it. So the question that I posed in the research is, are you bringing a spiral-bound notebook to lead a podcast generation? And as much as I wanted to come up with a different image, I couldn't get away from this one, because this is what we want to move away from. And those of you who know me know I often throw something in at the end of my webinars that's a little more fun and a little more personal. Bonus points if you can put in the chat the name of this leader, and no fair Googling it. But if you are an Office Space fan or even watched it once, and you can put his name in the chat. But this is what we want to move away from. And he's hyperbole for sure, right? In the office, formally dressed, watching over his employees. This is what we have continued to move away from and want to reinvent. Okay, Dominic. Let's see if others, there we go. And I'm hoping you all didn't Google it. First name there, Jason's got his first name. Yeah, I mean, again, a bit of humor here at the end, but my comment is it's time really to think about yourself as a leader, or maybe the leaders that you're responsible for. Are you bringing a spiral bound notebook to lead a podcast generation? How can you reinvent the way you're showing up as a leader? Okay, so key takeaways here before we move into some questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them. I know you can also, I believe, send them to Sue if you don't want to put them in the all attendee section. So 4 reinventions from ego to emotional intelligence. Pick your head up, be aware of how you're coming across to your people. Move from, fast mouse there, move from tell to talk. That time spent on empowering with higher value add activities like career development and coaching, this is your opportunity for reinvention leaders. And so I would advocate for more time on those empowering skills, career development and coaching specifically. Be aware of this collision of organizational and personal values. It's a trend that was before the pandemic. We're seeing it a lot. And I believe that it will continue. And I think folks are voting with their feet and with their personal values top of mind. So lean into the conversation. This is, I think, your chance. And then, to move from lost leaders to rising ranks. Have a concentrated effort on supporting your future people leaders with a focus on their development needs. And again, what we heard from them is they want to learn from you on the job, even if on the job is in a hybrid Zoom-based environment. And they want that support from you on mindsets and skill sets. So with that, I know we have couple of minutes for questions. As we move into the Q&A, I also just wanted to let you know, here's a link to the research. Again, you will get all of this research by fact of your participation and registration for this webinar. Certainly, this is a link that you can share with others. And with that, I would love to take any questions.
All right. Thank you for a great discussion, Leah. Just a reminder, if you have a question, you can enter it into the Q&A or into the chat, and we will grab it there. And Leah just reminded you that we'll be sending you the recording and the PDF in our follow-up email. So it does look like we have some questions coming in. So I'm going to give you this first one, Leah. I hear your advice about wanting my employees to show up as their true selves, understanding what motivates them and sharing what drives me personally. In the past, I've been strict about drawing a line between personal and professional lives. Where is the line now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish that the answer were, here's specifically the line. I'm going to give you the precise place where it is, and you can't go over that. But I think the truth is you're going to have to, as leaders, feel your way through that to some extent. So you should, first of all, increasingly give your employees safe space to share more of who they are, not to force it, but to share it. And share particularly as relevant to their work scheduling or the impact of that element of what they're dealing with, maybe at home, on the work that they do for you. So give them the space that is safe to share about themselves, particularly in a way that's relevant to the work that they do for you. You do have to respect their privacy. And so I would say continue to push the line, but also be aware of reading the virtual room, so to speak, and reading the comfort level of your employees. Don't push them too far, too fast, because some people may not be comfortable sharing, a lot about who they are and what's going on, but some element of sharing, I think, is increasingly getting expected and necessary if we're going to have some of these real conversations about fatigue and values and work-life boundaries. I would say make sure you're evaluating their performance, not judging their home life. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And back to sort of my first comment about this question, test the waters, and then you may have to correct. And so if you do need to correct, if something doesn't land right or maybe goes too far, acknowledge it, name it, and figure out what that right balance is. But I don't think the answer is to avoid it. I think the old school, it's separate and it needs to stay that way, is somewhat unrealistic. But I recognize too that it is, there are a little bit murky waters that you need to navigate as a leader. Yeah, so I'm wondering, I see Dominic's question in the chat, and it somewhat, I think, bleeds a little bit into the question that was just asked. So do we have some additional tips on things new managers can do to create a psychologically safe work environment? Yeah, so one thing I will say is there's some great articles out there about psychological safety in a hybrid environment as well. So not a lot, but some really good ones. And what I would say for new managers, one thing is go first. Share a little bit of, and I'll use a hybrid term right now just because we are, share a little bit of your remote reality. Why is it maybe that you work from home a certain number of days? or go into the office. So I would say for new managers, go first and share a little bit about yourself. I would say continue to be empathetic, put yourself in the shoes of your employees and try to be tuned into what's going on with them. In terms of other things that you can do, Dominic, I would say in meetings, for example, be aware of who's speaking up and who's not, and give space for some of the quieter voices to emerge, for you to even gently call them out if you notice that certain people are holding back. I would say as a new manager too, creating a psychologically safe environment, notice if other people have stepped over the line in terms of creating a psychologically safe environment, and you may need to address that particular incident. So if somebody makes a comment about, gosh, we really miss not seeing you in the office, ooh, things like that. And I know I'm giving you hybrid examples, but as a manager, you need to not only role model the behavior by sharing, by creating the conditions that draw out quieter voices, but also by calling and naming and addressing some of those challenges that you might see bubble up, so that they don't go unaddressed. And then I think there was another question, Sue. How can we help leaders shift their mindset? So Lois, thank you for asking me this one. I did some research on mindsets a couple of years ago, so this topic is near and dear to my heart. And while I don't suggest you necessarily go and talk to them about cognitive psychology and Beck's triangle, one of the things that we advocate for in readying leaders to shift their mindset is doing a couple of things. First, in order to shift your mindset, let's say from a place of fixed to growth, you need to be aware of where you are right now. You can't get to point B if you don't know the distance from point A or even where your point A is. So understand where you are, again, in my example, on a spectrum from fixed to growth. How can you do that? Well, you can do some self-assessment and self-reflection, but you can also get feedback from others to understand how you are showing up with a maybe more positive or growth-oriented mindset. Then you need to take small actions or start making small shifts in your behavior to see something from a different vantage point. So how can you maybe begin consciously in your team meetings or in your day-to-day interactions, reframe something from a growth-oriented perspective, right? Let's change the post-mortem discussion to a discussion about, things that we will improve upon the next time, right? Shifting that language, shifting that perspective in that activity that you're performing as a leader is critical. And then last but not least, link those actions to something bigger. So if it's just about, changing the name of post-mortem meeting to something more positive, that's not going to be as inspiring and anchoring. But if you can link that to something bigger, I want to be known as the leader who is, incredibly inspiring and desirable to work for. So I would say, in order to make the shift, be aware of your current perspective, start seeing things from an alternate point of view, take small actions associated with the behavior change that you want, and then link that to something bigger and more meaningful. And I'll give you one final example just to make it maybe super relevant and to personalize it. So if I want to be healthier, I can't think myself into better health, but I can take certain actions associated with being healthier, like working out, like meditating, eating better. And as I start to take those actions, I'm going to start to feel better. So there's a connection between the thought and the behavior and now the feeling. Now, if I'm feeling healthier, I'm going to think of myself increasingly as a healthy person. So I would say, understand the connection between thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, and also take that 4-step approach to making a mindset shift. Sorry, Lois, you got me started on mindsets, and it's hard to get me off that.
So Leah, I have a question for you that's come in. So do you have any suggestions for someone when their leader doesn't advocate for them because the leader is loyal to the organization and not to the personal development or career goal and advancement?
Yeah. So that can be a struggle, and I think you'll have to evaluate at what point that person maybe is sort of officially and formally a blocker for you, and not going to, and ultimately going to block you from advancing or evolving your development in the way that you want to. But what I would say is, and we advocate for this, is the concept of having a career community, and to build community. I I don't like the concept of networking. It feels a little smarmy to me. But if you can build relationships with people in your community, your career community, that can help you in different ways, you don't have to rely purely on your manager for that development and advancement. So when you think about, who are the people that sponsor you within your organization? Who is it that speaks for you? Can you develop relationships with people that sponsor you? Can you develop a relationship with a mentor? Somebody who maybe knows the ropes of your industry or your organization and can give you the type of guidance that maybe you need for, again, that company and that industry. Could you have a coach, somebody who is really going to ask you those mind-opening, thought-provoking questions that help you to push your limits and to evolve and grow? So what I would say is, that manager does play an important role, but maybe if you broaden your thinking and consider your larger community and where are your other sources of support, you won't be as dependent on that particular individual. And ultimately, only you can decide if they're too much of a blocker, such that you need to reflect on what other choices you might have.
Okay, I think we might have time for one more. So here's one. I don't think you've answered this one yet. How do we influence leaders to change their mindsets? For example, those who like to tell rather than talk, but firmly believe they talk rather than tell.
Well, I would say that they are, again, individuals who could use some coaching and some guidance. So, finding your opportunities as a member of their team to provide that guidance, and you might want to go slowly at first in providing feedback if you feel that that person is not open to it. I would certainly hope that there's maybe larger awareness in the organization, and it's a company that's looking at getting that leader some development support, whether that's in the form of a formal leadership development program or coaching for that individual so that they can become more self-aware. But you raise a good point. It's hard to force self-awareness. But I would say if that individual is at the very least creating an environment of psychological safety, perhaps you can find your inroad to start providing some of your own feedback that will then, again, increase that awareness, that perceived arrogance or standoffishness that they maybe don't intend, but is the impact. And with the feedback that you can give, maybe you can take it from here over time to here, and open up their eyes and their perspectives. I mean, I believe that most leaders want to do a good job for their people and for their organization. And so they're not perfect. Much like all of us, they've been through a lot in the past year and a half. One of my colleagues likened it to getting to the end of a race and seeing the finish line, and they got there only to start to breathe a sigh of relief and realize that the finish line is actually several miles down the road. So be patient with your leaders and know that, or at least I think that they certainly are well-intended and for the most part want the best for their people. So find your opportunities to share with them and give them some feedback, as certainly the environment allows.
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resource-library.